My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 29, and I was still wearing my black funeral dress when Victoria demanded I stay for a 20-hour shift. My mother's body wasn't even cold in the morgue. Through my tears, I reorganized client files while she watched with twisted satisfaction. Then I discovered it. The forgotten Sullivan Industries contract worth $3 million sitting buried in her desk drawer. After 3 years of her psychological torture, fate had finally handed me the perfect weapon for revenge. Before I tell you how this workplace nightmare ended, I want to know, have you ever had a boss who made your life hell? If this story hits close to home, please hit that like button. My mom always said that shared struggles bring people together, and she'd be proud knowing her daughter's story is helping others feel less alone. When she taught me to stand up for myself, I never imagined it would lead to this corporate showdown. Subscribe to follow my journey of grief, betrayal, and ultimately justice served in the most unexpected way. My mother, Catherine Mitchell, was my anchor, my confidant, and my fiercest supporter. We had the kind of relationship that made other people envious, more like best friends than mother and daughter. She was the one who taught me to ride a bike, helped me through my first heartbreak, and later guided me through career challenges with wisdom earned from her 25 years as a nurse. Mom had this gentle laugh that could calm anyone's nerves and eyes that sparkled with mischief when she was planning something special. Her favorite saying was, "Kindness is strength, honey, but don't let people mistake it for weakness." I tried to live by those words, even when it felt impossible. 10 months before that devastating day at the office, Mom was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The diagnosis came during what should have been a routine mammogram. The radiologist's concerned expression told us everything before he spoke a word. Treatment would be aggressive: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. The timeline was uncertain, but with early intervention, the prognosis was cautiously optimistic. I remember collapsing in the hospital parking lot after receiving the news, my legs giving out beneath me as the reality crashed over me. Mom was the one who helped me up, her own eyes filled with tears, but her voice steady. "We're going to fight this together, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere without a battle." Our family had always been tight-knit, though like most families, we had our complexities. My father, Robert, was a quiet man who expressed love through actions rather than words. He managed Mom's medical appointments with military precision, researched treatment options obsessively, and somehow maintained his job as an accountant while becoming Mom's full-time caregiver. My older brother, David, who was 32 and lived 2 states away with his wife and young children, called daily and visited monthly, bringing his infectious optimism and terrible jokes that somehow always made Mom smile. Then there was my younger sister, Rachel. At 26, she was pursuing her master's degree in social work and struggling financially. The cancer diagnosis hit her particularly hard because she and Mom had always shared a special bond. Rachel wanted to take a semester off to help, but Mom insisted she continue her studies. "Education is the one thing no one can take from you," Mom would say, repeating the mantra that had gotten me through college. The tension in our family centered around my job situation. Everyone knew I was struggling at Pinnacle Marketing Group, but they didn't understand the depth of the toxicity I faced daily under Victoria Sterling's management. They saw a prestigious company name, a decent salary, and assumed I was being dramatic about workplace stress. "Just keep your head down and do good work," Dad would advise. Difficult bosses are temporary. If only he knew how wrong he was. I joined Pinnacle Marketing Group 3 years earlier, fresh from a smaller agency and thrilled to land a position at one of the city's most respected marketing firms. The company boasted an impressive client roster, innovative campaigns that won industry awards, and a reputation for developing top talent. Landing the job felt like hitting the career jackpot, a feeling that lasted exactly until I met Victoria Sterling. Victoria was 44, impeccably dressed, and had a track record of delivering results that made the executive team overlook her destructive management style. In client presentations and company meetings, she was charming, articulate, and appeared to genuinely care about her team's development. But behind closed doors, she was a master manipulator who seemed to derive pleasure from psychological torture. "You should feel grateful to be here," she told me during our first private meeting. This position had over 200 applicants, many with more experience than you. Don't make me regret taking a chance on someone so unproven. I didn't realize then that this was her standard introduction to new team members, establishing dominance, creating insecurity, setting the stage for years of mental warfare. Over the next 3 years, I watched Victoria systematically destroy confident professionals. She would praise someone's work publicly, then criticize the same project privately to undermine their confidence. She took credit for successful campaigns while ensuring that failures were traced back to individual team members. Those who challenged her found themselves excluded from important meetings, assigned to insignificant projects, or subjected to impossible deadlines designed to guarantee failure. The department had a revolving door of talented people who either quit in frustration or were forced out under mysterious circumstances. Victoria always had plausible explanations: performance issues, cultural fit problems, restructuring necessities. But those of us who remained knew better. We were survivors of a carefully orchestrated campaign of workplace bullying that would have impressed military strategists. Despite this toxic environment, I persevered. I needed the job, especially after Mom's diagnosis, when medical bills began accumulating despite insurance coverage. Experimental treatments, nutritional supplements, the comfortable adjustable bed we bought so Mom could sleep better. These expenses added up quickly. Dad's salary covered basics, but the extras that might extend or improve Mom's quality of life required my income. "I'm proud of you for sticking it out," Mom said during one of our late-night conversations when treatment side effects kept her awake. "You've got resilience, sweetheart. Don't let that woman break your spirit." I promised her I wouldn't, but some days it felt like Victoria was winning that war. The day Mom died was the culmination of Victoria's cruelest campaign yet. Pinnacle Marketing Group marketed itself as a progressive company that valued work-life balance, employee wellness, and collaborative culture. The website featured smiling employees in bright, modern offices, testimonials about professional growth, and leadership quotes about supporting team members through life's challenges. The reality, at least in Victoria's domain, was the complete opposite. The competitive atmosphere was toxic by design. Victoria deliberately pitted team members against each other for limited resources, recognition, and advancement opportunities. She maintained detailed performance charts that were displayed publicly, creating a humiliating fishbowl environment where everyone's successes and failures were visible to colleagues. She claimed this promoted healthy competition, but there was nothing healthy about the anxiety and backstabbing it generated. Victoria's ascent to power had been strategic and ruthless. She joined Pinnacle 5 years earlier with impressive credentials from a competing firm and immediately aligned herself with CEO Michael Crawford. Their connection was professional but personal. They had worked together briefly years earlier, and Victoria leveraged that history to gain his trust and protection. This relationship made her virtually untouchable, no matter how many complaints reached HR. Her management philosophy was divide and conquer. She maintained an inner circle of 3 or 4 employees who received preferential treatment, better assignments, flexible schedules, invitations to exclusive client events, while the rest of us competed for scraps. The composition of this favored group changed periodically, keeping everyone insecure about their standing and desperate to regain favor. "Never trust Victoria's compliments," warned Jake Morrison, a senior account manager who had survived 2 years under her leadership. "She builds you up just to watch you fall harder." I learned this lesson through painful experience, watching colleagues celebrate promotions that turned into dead-end roles or praise that preceded public humiliation. There was Jennifer from the creative team who questioned Victoria's strategy during a brainstorming session. Within a week, Jennifer was reassigned to the company's least desirable accounts, effectively sidelining her career. 3 months later, she was eliminated during a convenient restructuring that somehow only affected employees who had crossed Victoria. Then there was Michael, a brilliant strategist who landed a major client that Victoria had been pursuing unsuccessfully for months. Instead of celebrating the victory, Victoria accused Michael of undermining her authority by not involving her in final negotiations. He was placed on a performance improvement plan and eventually left for a competitor, his confidence completely shattered. Those of us who survived developed elaborate coping mechanisms. We documented everything in detailed emails, built alliances with colleagues in other departments, and tried to make ourselves indispensable to key clients. But complaining to human resources was futile. The HR director, Linda Patterson, maintained a professional friendship with Victoria and seemed to view workplace stress as character-building rather than problematic. "This is a high-performance environment," I overheard Linda tell a tearful intern who had reported Victoria's bullying. "If you can't handle direct feedback, perhaps corporate marketing isn't the right fit for you." The message was clear: adapt or leave. Despite this hostile environment, I was determined to succeed. I arrived early, stayed late, and produced work that even Victoria couldn't criticize openly. I built strong relationships with clients who specifically requested me for their projects, creating a protective shield of sorts. Victoria couldn't target me too aggressively without risking client satisfaction, which was the one metric executives valued above all else. My greatest achievement was securing the Reynolds Group account, a regional healthcare network planning a national expansion. Victoria had been courting their marketing director for months, with elaborate presentations and expensive entertainment. What ultimately won them over was my comprehensive analysis of their current brand positioning and a practical strategy for market penetration. The client specifically requested that I serve as their primary contact, a victory that earned me temporary protection but permanent resentment from Victoria. "Congratulations," she said when the contract was signed, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Just remember, success can be fleeting. Don't get comfortable in a position you might not be qualified to maintain." The threat was unmistakable. The Reynolds victory increased Victoria's scrutiny of my work tenfold. She began requiring daily progress reports, questioning my decisions in front of clients, and assigning me additional responsibilities without removing existing ones. It was a calculated effort to make me fail through overwork and impossible standards. When Mom's condition worsened, this pressure became almost unbearable. Victoria seemed to view my family crisis as an opportunity to prove her point that I couldn't handle the demands of the position. Each request for time off to accompany Mom to treatments was met with sighs and reminders of impending deadlines. Each day I spent at the hospital resulted in a mountain of urgent tasks upon my return, many of which could have been handled by other team members. "Family emergencies don't pause client expectations," she reminded me constantly. "The rest of the team shouldn't have to compensate for your personal situation." The team she referred to consisted largely of new hires who were afraid to appear sympathetic to someone who had clearly fallen from favor. Even Jake, who remained friendly, kept a professional distance during office hours, aware that being seen as my ally could make him Victoria's next target. As Mom's condition deteriorated, so did my standing at Pinnacle. Projects I had developed were reassigned to others, without explanation. Client meetings were scheduled during times I had clearly marked as unavailable for medical appointments. My previously stellar performance reviews suddenly contained concerns about my reliability and long-term commitment. Throughout this campaign of professional isolation, Victoria maintained plausible deniability. She expressed appropriate sympathy when others were present, sent a standard company flower arrangement when Mom entered hospice care, and publicly offered flexibility that never materialized in practice. "Of course, family comes first," she told our team during a particularly difficult week when Mom had been hospitalized for complications. "We're all here to support Sarah during this challenging time." Hours later, in a private email, she reminded me that the Reynolds presentation deadline remained unchanged despite my personal circumstances. I was being pushed to my breaking point, and Victoria knew it. What she didn't know was that I was my mother's daughter, and Mom hadn't raised me to break easily. Mom's cancer journey began with what seemed like a routine screening that turned into a nightmare of medical appointments, treatment decisions, and slowly diminishing hope. The initial surgery to remove the tumor was successful, but pathology revealed that the cancer was more aggressive than initially suspected. This meant months of intensive chemotherapy followed by radiation treatments. Mom approached the battle with characteristic grace and determination. "I've got too much living left to do," she insisted, creating a bucket list that included teaching Rachel to make her famous lasagna and seeing me finally stand up to Victoria in a way that would make her proud. The first 6 months following diagnosis were a whirlwind of treatment schedules, medication management, and learning to navigate the complex healthcare system. I took as much time off as I dared, using vacation days, personal time, and the limited family leave Pinnacle provided. Victoria's response was predictable and cruel. "Everyone has family challenges, Sarah," she said during a particularly difficult week when Mom had been hospitalized for severe treatment side effects. "I need to know if you can maintain your professional responsibilities or if we should redistribute your accounts temporarily." The threat was clear. Temporarily at Pinnacle often became permanently. I assured her I could manage, which meant working from hospital waiting rooms, answering emails at midnight, and preparing presentations while Mom slept fitfully in her hospital bed beside me. The Reynolds Group account required constant attention, and I wasn't about to give Victoria an excuse to remove me from the project. Month 7 brought unexpected hope. The chemotherapy had been more effective than anticipated, shrinking the tumor significantly. The oncologist cautiously suggested that Mom might be a candidate for an experimental treatment that could potentially extend her prognosis from months to years. We celebrated that night with takeout from Mom's favorite Chinese restaurant, the first genuinely happy moment our family had shared since the diagnosis. To second chances, Mom toasted, raising her cup of green tea since alcohol was forbidden during treatment. And to my stubborn daughter, who refuses to let bullies win. She winked at me, and I felt a surge of determination that carried me through the next several weeks. The experimental treatment required Mom to travel to a research hospital in another state for a month-long intensive program. I requested a week off to help her get settled and adjusted to the new protocol. Victoria's response was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. She approved the time off but assigned me the Morrison Industries proposal, our largest potential new client of the year, due the day I returned. "The team will cover your regular responsibilities," she explained in an email copied to the entire department, "but we can't ask someone else to take on Morrison with such short notice. I'm confident you'll find time to work on it during your vacation." I spent evenings in the hotel near Mom's treatment facility, working on the Morrison proposal while she recovered from daily procedures. I researched their competition while helping her manage treatment side effects. I practiced my presentation in whispers while sitting beside her bed during difficult nights when pain kept her awake. When I delivered a flawless presentation upon my return, securing the Morrison account against fierce competition, Victoria's only comment was, "The timeline was a bit rushed. Let's plan better for next time." No acknowledgement of the impossible circumstances, no recognition of the quality work, just another subtle criticism designed to undermine my confidence. As Mom moved into month 9, exceeding initial predictions but showing signs of treatment resistance, the balance between work and family became increasingly precarious. I requested a temporary reduction in hours, willing to take a proportional pay cut. Victoria denied the request, claiming client relationships would suffer. I inquired about extended family leave. She reminded me that I hadn't been with the company long enough to qualify for the full benefit, conveniently ignoring that I qualified for partial coverage. Mom noticed the toll this was taking. During a rare afternoon when treatment side effects had subsided enough for clarity, she confronted me about the situation. "You look exhausted, sweetheart," she said, using the pet name that always made me feel safe. "Is that woman still making your life hell?" I tried to deflect, not wanting her to worry about my problems when she was fighting for her life. But Mom had always been able to see through my protective facades. "Listen to me," she said, her once strong hand now frail as it gripped mine. "There are people in this world who build others up, and there are people who tear others down to feel bigger about themselves. Your Victoria is the second kind. But here's what she doesn't understand. She only has power over you if you give it to her." "I can't quit, Mom," I said, thinking about the medical bills that kept accumulating despite insurance. "We need the income." She shook her head weakly. "I'm not saying quit. I'm saying stop giving her your dignity along with your time. People like that can take your job, your energy, even your peace of mind, but they can only take your self-respect if you hand it over willingly." It was one of our last meaningful conversations. The following week, Mom developed a serious infection that her weakened immune system couldn't fight effectively. Her body, already strained from months of aggressive treatment, began shutting down. The experimental protocol was discontinued, and we transitioned to comfort care. I called Victoria on a Tuesday morning, my voice breaking as I explained that hospice had given Mom days, possibly hours. "I need to be with my family," I said. "I'm sorry about the Patterson meeting, but Jake has all the necessary information." "The Patterson account specifically requested you," Victoria interrupted coldly. "They're worth 7 figures annually, Sarah. Surely you can come in for 2 hours. Your mother won't know the difference at this point." Those words ignited something inside me that I didn't know existed. "My mother is dying," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I will not be coming in today, tomorrow, or until this is over. I'll contact you when I have more information." I hung up before she could respond, something I never had the courage to do before. Mom died that night at 2:14 a.m. with Dad, David, Rachel, and me holding her hands. She slipped away peacefully, her face finally free from the pain that had defined her last months. The grief was overwhelming, but there was also relief that her suffering had ended and gratitude that we had been able to say goodbye. The next morning, I sent a brief email to Victoria and HR, informing them of Mom's passing and requesting the company's standard bereavement leave. Victoria's reply came within an hour, expressing appropriate condolences and confirming the leave. Linda from HR followed up with official paperwork and the company's standard sympathy message. The funeral was scheduled for Friday, allowing out-of-town relatives to make travel arrangements and giving the funeral home adequate time for preparations. I spent those days in a haze of grief and logistics, helping Dad with arrangements, accepting condolences from neighbors, and trying to process the reality that Mom was gone forever. Thursday evening, as family and friends gathered at our house for an informal dinner before the next day's service, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. I stared at the screen in disbelief. "I know tomorrow is difficult, but we have a crisis with the Sullivan Industries proposal. Their board moved the deadline to Monday instead of next Friday. I need you to come in after the service to reconstruct the financial projections. Everyone else is unavailable. It shouldn't take more than a few hours." The Sullivan Industries contract had been in development for months. The deadline had always been the following Friday, giving us plenty of time for final revisions. There was no crisis that couldn't wait until after the weekend, no emergency that required my immediate attention. But in my grief-stricken state, with financial worries about Dad's future weighing heavily on my mind, I couldn't summon the strength to fight. I texted back a simple, "Okay," and turned my phone off for the rest of the evening, trying to be present with my family while dread built in my stomach about what awaited me after tomorrow's funeral. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the weather matching our collective mood. I helped Dad with his tie, while Rachel assisted with last-minute catering arrangements. David managed logistics with his characteristic efficiency, ensuring that out-of-town relatives had transportation and accommodation. The funeral home was packed beyond capacity. Mom had been beloved in the community, a nurse who had cared for countless patients over the years, a volunteer at the Children's Hospital, a friend who never hesitated to help during difficult times. Flower arrangements filled the room, their fragrance a bittersweet reminder of life's beauty amid our grief. The service passed in a blur of tears and shared memories. The pastor spoke about Mom's compassion and faith. Her colleagues from the hospital shared stories that made us laugh through our tears. David delivered a eulogy that captured Mom's spirit perfectly. When it was my turn to speak, I somehow found strength in remembering her words about dignity and self-respect. "My mother believed that how we treat others reveals our true character," I said, looking out at the sea of faces before me. "She showed us that kindness is a choice, that integrity matters more than convenience, and that love is the only legacy that truly endures." The most unexpected moment came when Rachel, typically reserved about emotional displays, approached the podium during the open sharing time. My sister, who managed her public image carefully, was visibly struggling to maintain composure. "I thought I had time," she began, her voice catching. "I thought career goals and academic achievements would make my mother proud, that success would justify the distance I maintained. I was wrong." She looked directly at Dad, then at me. "Mom understood what I'm only now learning. That no degree, no achievement is worth missing the moments that matter with the people who matter. Her unexpected vulnerability touched something deep inside me. Perhaps we had all been more complex and caring than our surface interactions revealed. At the graveside service, I stood between Dad and David, with Rachel on Dad's other side. As they lowered Mom's casket into the ground, Dad squeezed my hand with surprising strength. The physical pressure was almost welcome, something concrete to focus on besides the emptiness opening inside my chest. The reception afterward was held at our family home, filled with people sharing stories about Mom over sandwiches and coffee. I was helping David's wife arrange another platter of food when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Victoria, again. The Sullivan situation is more urgent than anticipated. Can you come in now instead of later? We need at least 20 hours to rebuild the financial models completely. 20 hours? Not the few hours mentioned the night before. And rebuild completely? What had happened to the original projections? I stepped outside to call her. Victoria, I'm at my mother's funeral reception, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What happened to the original Sullivan projections? System crash, she said dismissively. The backup files were corrupted. The point is, they're gone and someone needs to recreate them from scratch. The board meeting is Monday morning, and everyone else is unavailable. Everyone? I questioned. Jake, Michael, even you? Jake has a family wedding he can't miss. Michael is out of town with no laptop access. And I have the Children's Hospital charity auction tonight that's been planned for months. I can't rebuild the projections myself because you have the most familiarity with Sullivan's requirements. Her voice hardened. This is a $3 million contract, Sarah. Are you really going to jeopardize it because you're feeling emotional? What would your mother think about that kind of professional irresponsibility? The manipulation was obvious, but effective. What would Mom think? She'd raised me to honor commitments, to be reliable, to do the right thing even when it was difficult. But she'd also told me not to surrender my dignity to bullies. I'll be there in 2 hours, I finally said, hating myself for giving in but seeing no alternative. But Victoria, I want this documented in my personnel file that I came in during bereavement leave for a family emergency. Of course, she replied smoothly. Your dedication will be noted appropriately. I returned to the reception, pulled Dad aside, and explained the situation as gently as possible. His face fell with disappointment, but he nodded with weary resignation. Your mother would understand, he said quietly. Responsibility was everything to her. I'm so sorry, I whispered, hugging him tightly. This isn't how I wanted to spend today. David was less understanding. That's complete garbage, Sarah, he said angrily. They can't make you work on the day of Mom's funeral. They're not making me, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It's just a really important client. Surprisingly, it was Rachel who offered the most supportive response. I'll stay with Dad tonight, she said. Use my car, it has better headlights for driving home late. Then, with uncharacteristic hesitation, want me to bring you dinner later? 20 hours is a long time without proper meals. Touched by her offer, I nodded gratefully. That would be wonderful. Thank you. I didn't have time to change out of my funeral attire before heading to the office. The black dress and low heels that had carried me through Mom's service would now carry me through this professional ordeal, a fitting metaphor somehow. The Pinnacle Marketing building was eerily quiet when I arrived. Most employees were enjoying their Friday evening with family and friends. I swiped my access card, the empty lobby echoing with my footsteps as I made my way to the elevator. Our department floor was dark except for the light spilling from Victoria's corner office. She looked up when I entered, taking in my funeral attire with an expression I couldn't quite read. Discomfort? Satisfaction? Before her professional mask settled back into place. The Sullivan files are on your desk, she said briskly. I've left notes about what needs to be reconstructed. I'll be leaving for the charity auction in 30 minutes, but I'll check in later tonight. I nodded silently and went to my workstation, finding a stack of folders and a yellow legal pad with Victoria's handwriting outlining the tasks ahead. As I began sorting through the materials, trying to focus through the fog of grief, Victoria appeared beside me. "I really appreciate this, Sarah," she said, now dressed in an elegant evening gown clearly intended for her charity event. "The executive team will hear about your commitment. I'll be back around 1 a.m. to check your progress." The promised 30 minutes stretched to nearly an hour as Victoria made phone calls and touched up her makeup. When she finally left, the silence of the empty office pressed in around me like a physical weight. I sat in my funeral dress, staring at spreadsheets and market analyses while memories of Mom kept breaking through my concentration. Mom teaching me to drive in an empty parking lot, patiently coaching me through my anxiety. Mom cheering embarrassingly loud at my college graduation. Mom in her hospital bed, telling me not to let Victoria steal my spirit. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed between grief and obligation, before I forced myself to begin working. The financial projections were incredibly complex, requiring data from multiple sources and careful analysis to ensure accuracy. Under normal circumstances, this would be challenging but manageable. Today, each number seemed to blur before my eyes, requiring multiple checks to avoid errors. Hours passed. The office grew darker as evening settled over the city. I switched on my desk lamp, creating a small pool of light in the otherwise empty space. At some point, my phone pinged with a text from Rachel. "Coming by with food in 30 minutes. Need anything specific?" Her arrival was a welcome interruption. She appeared in the doorway balancing a thermal bag and 2 cups of coffee, looking incongruous in her expensive funeral suit against a stark office backdrop. "This place is creepy when it's empty," she commented, setting the food on my desk. "How's it going?" I gestured helplessly at the scattered papers and my laptop screen displaying complex financial models.
"Slowly.
I keep losing focus." Rachel pulled up a chair beside me, opened the thermal bag to reveal containers of soup from Mom's favorite deli, and asked, "What exactly are we working on?" The "we" surprised me. Rachel had never shown interest in my work before, but her presence and practical offer of help cut through my exhaustion. I found myself explaining the Sullivan Project, the supposedly crashed files, and the impossible deadline. "This is highly suspicious," Rachel said after hearing the full story. "System crashes don't usually target specific files, and companies this size have multiple backup systems. Plus, 20 hours to recreate something that probably took weeks originally." I hadn't had the mental energy to question Victoria's explanation, but Rachel's skepticism awakened my own doubts. "You think she deleted them deliberately?" Rachel's expression hardened. "I think your boss saw an opportunity to make you suffer, fail, or both. Mom would call that bullying, plain and simple." Hearing Mom mentioned stirred something inside me. I straightened in my chair and reached for the container of soup. "Well, I'm not going to fail. Help me understand these market penetration models." For the next 4 hours, Rachel stayed, using her social work training and analytical mind to help me organize complex data and verify assumptions. Her systematic approach caught errors I was too exhausted to notice, and her presence kept the worst of my grief at bay. "I should have realized you were dealing with this kind of toxic environment," she said as she prepared to leave around midnight. "I was so focused on my own academic stress that I missed what was happening to you." "We've all been dealing with our own challenges," I admitted. "But you're here now, and that means everything." After she left, promising to check on Dad and return in the morning with breakfast, I continued working through the night. Victoria returned from her charity auction around 1 a.m. as promised, seeming surprised to find me still diligently working. "How's progress?" she asked, and I detected a slight slur in her words suggesting she'd enjoyed the open bar at her event. "I've rebuilt the core financial models and updated the market analysis," I reported professionally despite my exhaustion. "I should finish the executive summary and presentation slides by 8 a.m. Victoria frowned. "The board members arrive at 7 a.m. for preliminary review. Everything needs to be completed by then." Another shifting deadline. Another impossible expectation. I nodded mechanically, too tired to argue. "I need to grab some files from my office for review at home," she said, moving toward her corner office. "Keep up the excellent work." As Victoria disappeared into her office, I stood to stretch my legs and get water from the kitchen, my funeral heels long since discarded under my desk. Walking past the conference room, something caught my eye on the table, a familiar blue folder with the Sullivan Industries logo. Curious, I entered the conference room and opened the folder. Inside was a complete copy of the supposedly corrupted financial projections, presentation slides, and executive summary, all with my name listed as the preparer, but with subtle changes that introduced significant errors into the calculations. My exhausted brain took several moments to process what I was seeing. These weren't accidentally corrupted files. This was deliberate sabotage. Victoria had copied my original work, introduced errors that would be discovered during the board presentation, and set me up to take responsibility for a potential $3 million failure. The 20-hour shift wasn't about recreating lost work. It was about keeping me occupied and exhausted while she executed her plan to destroy my career. I quickly photographed the doctored documents with my phone, then returned them exactly as I'd found them. Back at my desk, I compared the sabotaged versions with what I was recreating. The differences were subtle but devastating. Growth projections inflated just enough to seem overly optimistic, cost estimates reduced just enough to appear unrealistic, timeline assumptions that would be impossible to meet. As I sat contemplating this betrayal, Victoria emerged from her office, carrying a leather briefcase. "I'm heading home now. I expect the completed work in my email by 6:30 a.m. for final review before the board arrives." "Of course," I replied, maintaining a neutral expression despite the fury and betrayal burning inside me. "Have a good night, Victoria." After she left, I sat motionless, staring at the evidence of her sabotage on my phone screen. Mom's voice seemed to whisper in my memory, "People show you who they are, sweetheart. Believe them the first time." Victoria had shown me exactly who she was, someone willing to sabotage a colleague's career while they grieved their mother's death. The question now was, who was I going to be in response? I think about that moment often, sitting in my funeral dress in an empty office at 2 a.m., exhausted and grieving, facing a crossroads that would define my future. Would Mom want me to fight back or rise above? Would she tell me to expose Victoria's scheme or protect my job by staying silent? I wish I could say I knew immediately what to do, but the truth is I spent hours wrestling with my options while continuing to work on the legitimate projections. It wasn't until I went to Victoria's office looking for additional reference materials that I found the final piece of the puzzle that would change everything. There on her desk, partially hidden under meeting notes and expense receipts, was the original Sullivan Industries contract, not a copy, but the signed original that should have been processed weeks ago to begin project implementation. The signature date was nearly 6 weeks old, and attached sticky notes indicated Victoria had been deliberately sitting on it, creating the artificial deadline crisis. This wasn't just about sabotaging me anymore. This was about covering up her own serious negligence by creating a distraction. And suddenly, I knew exactly what Mom would want me to do. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us accidentally give us the very weapons we need to stand up to them. Have you ever experienced that kind of poetic justice? Share your thoughts in the comments about whether you'd have confronted Victoria immediately or planned a strategic response. The Sullivan Industries contract lay before me, its implications slowly crystallizing through my exhausted mind. I carefully examined every page, photographing the documents for evidence. The contract terms were standard for our industry, an 18-month engagement with quarterly reviews, confidentiality agreements, and detailed deliverables. What wasn't standard was the processing timeline. According to the attached email threads, Victoria had received the signed contract 42 days ago. Company policy required all contracts to be processed within 5 business days of receipt. The contract should have been registered in our system, copies distributed to relevant departments, and work officially commenced over a month ago. Instead, Victoria had buried it under paperwork on her desk, creating an artificial crisis that conveniently coincided with my bereavement leave.
But why?
What did she gain by delaying a major contract and potentially damaging a client relationship? The answer lay in the project assignment section. The original proposal, which I had helped develop, listed me as the lead account manager with Victoria as executive oversight. However, on the signed contract, there was a handwritten note from Sullivan's CEO. "We were particularly impressed with Sarah Mitchell's strategic analysis and presentation. We request that she serve as our primary point of contact throughout this engagement. Victoria had been essentially demoted in favor of me, and rather than process the contract and acknowledge this client preference, she had created circumstances designed to make me appear incompetent and unreliable. The manufactured crisis, the corrupted files, the doctored projections, all orchestrated to demonstrate that I couldn't handle the responsibility Sullivan wanted to give me. I sat in Victoria's chair, surrounded by evidence of her sabotage, and felt an unexpected calm replace my earlier confusion and grief. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a $3 million client relationship being jeopardized by one person's ego and vindictiveness. I needed advice from someone I could trust. Despite the late hour, now approaching 3 a.m., I texted Jake. "Are you awake? Professional emergency. Need your counsel urgently." Jake, despite Victoria's claim that he was unavailable due to a family wedding, responded almost immediately. "What's happening? Are you seriously at the office right now?" I gave him a brief summary of the situation, asking if he could meet me early in the morning before the supposed 7 a.m. board review. He agreed without hesitation, suggesting 5:30 at the coffee shop across from our building. With that support secured, I turned back to completing the legitimate work of rebuilding the Sullivan projections. I worked through the remaining hours before dawn, fueled by righteous anger, grief-induced insomnia, and the determination not to let Victoria's cruelty succeed. By 4:30 a.m., I had completed a meticulous reconstruction of the financial models, market analysis, and presentation slides, all backed up to my personal email and a USB drive for security. I freshened up in the executive bathroom using the emergency toiletries I kept in my desk drawer, but had no choice but to put my funeral dress back on. Somehow, it seemed appropriate for what I was planning. Jake was already waiting when I arrived at the coffee shop, concern evident in his expression as he took in my funeral attire and exhausted appearance. "You haven't been home since the funeral?" he asked, pushing a large coffee toward me. I shook my head, then systematically laid out everything I had discovered. The supposedly corrupted files that were never actually lost, the deliberately sabotaged projections, the hidden contract with its delayed processing, and the client's specific request for me as their primary contact. Jake's expression shifted from concern to anger as he reviewed the photographic evidence on my phone. "This is beyond workplace toxicity. This is potentially criminal misconduct. If the board knew she was sitting on a signed contract. If I had proper documentation and witnesses, maybe," I said, "but right now it's my word against hers, and she has Michael's protection." Jake considered this carefully. "So, what's your plan?" I sipped my coffee, organizing my thoughts. I need to neutralize the immediate threat to the Sullivan relationship while exposing Victoria's pattern of behavior in a way that protects the company's interests rather than appearing like a personal attack. The protection being making yourself indispensable while she looks incompetent? Jake asked. "Exactly," I replied. "If I can save the Sullivan contract while exposing Victoria's negligence in a way that serves company interests rather than personal revenge, Michael and the board will have to listen." We spent the next hour developing a detailed strategy. Jake agreed to serve as my witness and backup, confirming that he had never been informed about any family wedding that would make him unavailable during this critical period. We also identified other colleagues who might have experienced similar sabotage and could potentially corroborate a pattern of misconduct. "There's still significant risk," Jake warned. "Victoria won't go down without a fight, and she has powerful allies." "I know," I acknowledged, "but I keep thinking about what my mom would say. She always told me that bullies count on your fear and silence. They don't expect you to stand up with integrity and fight back intelligently." Jake reached across the table and squeezed my hand supportively. "Your mom sounds like she was an incredible woman. I wish I could have met her." "Me too," I said, throat tightening with emotion. "She would have liked you." As 6:30 approached, we finalized our plan. I would send the legitimate, corrected projections to the entire executive team, including Michael, with an explanation that focused on the urgency of properly processing the delayed contract rather than Victoria's misconduct. Jake would arrive at the 7 a.m. meeting prepared to confirm the timeline and absence of any communication about his supposed unavailability. Before leaving the coffee shop, I received an unexpected text from Rachel, bringing breakfast to her office at 7 as promised. Also, interesting connection. My thesis advisor consulted for Sullivan Industries last year on their expansion strategy. Small world. This new information added another dimension to our plan. Rachel's academic connection to Sullivan gave her legitimate insight into their corporate culture and strategic priorities that could support my projections if questioned. As I walked back to the office with Jake, still in my funeral dress after more than 30 hours, I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and clarity. Mom had taught me that integrity meant doing the right thing even when it was difficult, even when there were risks involved. "Ready?" Jake asked as we approached the building. I nodded firmly. No matter what happens next, I'm not surrendering my dignity or my principles again. We rode the elevator in supportive silence, both knowing that the next few hours would likely determine the trajectory of my career at Pinnacle Marketing, for better or worse. As we stepped onto our floor, I saw that the lights were already on. Victoria had arrived early, no doubt to review her sabotage materials before the board meeting. I took a deep breath, straightened my funeral dress one final time, and walked toward her office with the original Sullivan contract in hand. The time for submission and silence was over. Mom would be proud. Monday morning arrived with a kind of crisp clarity that sometimes follows complete emotional and physical exhaustion. After finally returning home Sunday afternoon, sleeping for 14 straight hours, and changing out of my funeral dress at last, I arrived at Pinnacle Marketing 45 minutes before the scheduled executive briefing on the Sullivan contract. I was professionally dressed, meticulously prepared, and absolutely resolved to see this through to whatever conclusion awaited. The conference room gradually filled with the executive team: Michael Crawford, our CEO, Linda from HR, the heads of finance, operations, and creative services, and several board members who had taken special interest in the Sullivan acquisition. Victoria arrived last, looking polished and confident as she distributed folders to everyone present. "Before we begin," she announced smoothly, "I want to acknowledge Sarah's extraordinary dedication. Despite suffering a tragic family loss, she worked through the weekend to reconstruct critical financial projections that were lost in our recent server incident." The calculated praise made my skin crawl, but I maintained a neutral expression. Several executives offered condolences about my mother, which I acknowledged with quiet thanks. "Now, let's review the Sullivan opportunity," Victoria continued, directing everyone to open their folders. "As you'll see in the executive summary, we're projecting first-year revenues of approximately $3.8 million with implementation costs of roughly $600,000, giving us an exceptional ROI for a new client relationship." Michael flipped through the pages, nodding approvingly. "These growth projections are very ambitious. What's driving such optimistic performance expectations?" Victoria launched into a detailed explanation of market penetration strategies and synergies with Sullivan's existing operations. I waited patiently, watching as several executives frowned slightly at specific figures, though none raised immediate concerns. When Victoria paused for questions, I saw my opening. "I'd like to address some critical discrepancies in the materials that have been distributed," I said calmly, making direct eye contact with Michael. Victoria's smile tightened dangerously. "Perhaps we should discuss any concerns privately after the meeting, Sarah." "Actually, this directly impacts today's discussion," I continued, pulling out my own folders and handing them to the executive assistant for distribution. "The materials you're currently reviewing contain several significant errors in the financial projections that would substantially misrepresent our capabilities to the client." A murmur ran through the room as executives accepted my folders. Victoria's face flushed with barely concealed anger beneath her professional veneer. "Furthermore," I continued before she could interrupt, "I need to bring an urgent matter to the team's attention. The Sullivan contract was actually signed and returned to Pinnacle nearly 6 weeks ago, but has not yet been processed in our system." I placed the original contract on the table, open to the signature page with its 6-week-old date clearly visible. I discovered this on Victoria's desk during my weekend work session. "The client is expecting implementation to have already begun according to the timeline specified in this document." Michael's expression darkened as he examined the contract. Victoria, is this accurate? We've had a signed contract for 6 weeks without processing it. Victoria's composure slipped momentarily before she recovered. There were some unusual clauses that required legal review. I was waiting for their input before processing. Our legal department confirmed they received no such request. I countered, sliding forward an email I had obtained that morning from our general counsel. Additionally, the contract includes a specific client request that I serve as their primary account manager, which contradicts the staffing plan in the materials Victoria distributed today. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Victoria attempted to redirect the conversation back to the financial projections, suggesting that my emotional state following my mother's death might have affected my analytical capabilities. That's when Jake intervened exactly as we had planned. I've reviewed both sets of projections independently, he stated clearly. The versions Sarah has provided align with our standard modeling practices and the preliminary work our team completed 2 months ago. The versions in Victoria's folders contain multiple anomalies that artificially inflate revenue expectations. Victoria's face contorted with fury. This is ridiculous. Jake was supposed to be unavailable this week for a family wedding. I never requested or was approved for any time off, Jake replied evenly. That information is incorrect. As the meeting descended into uncomfortable tension, there was a knock at the conference room door. The receptionist entered, looking apologetic for the interruption. I'm sorry, but there's a Rachel Mitchell here for Sarah. She says she has information relevant to your Sullivan discussion. Michael looked at me questioningly. I explained quickly, Rachel is my sister. She's a graduate student whose thesis advisor consulted for Sullivan Industries last year on their expansion strategy. She may have insights that could help clarify the situation. Michael nodded permission, and moments later Rachel entered, every inch the professional academic in her tailored blazer. She apologized for the interruption, then succinctly explained that her advisor had developed strategic projections for Sullivan's growth plan that included assumptions about their marketing investment with our firm. The projections in this folder, she said, indicating Victoria's materials, promise results that exceed even Sullivan's most optimistic internal forecasts by approximately 35%. Their board would immediately question these figures as unrealistic and potentially deceptive. The revelation landed like a bombshell in the conference room. Michael turned to Victoria, his expression now openly suspicious. Victoria, can you explain these discrepancies? Victoria's response was a desperate attempt at deflection. She questioned Rachel's authority to access confidential Sullivan information, suggested I had manipulated the situation out of personal grievance, and finally claimed that any errors were the result of the server failure rather than deliberate action. That's when Michael, who had been quietly observing from the corner, unexpectedly spoke up. This isn't the first time files have mysteriously disappeared or been altered before important presentations, he said quietly. All eyes turned to him as he described his own experience of sabotage 8 months earlier, missing research, shifted deadlines, and altered documents that had previously been attributed to technical glitches or miscommunications. His statement opened the floodgates, with 3 other team members sharing similar stories of suspicious incidents that had damaged their projects and reputations. Linda from HR shifted uncomfortably in her seat as the pattern became undeniable. Michael's expression grew increasingly grim as he realized the extent of the dysfunction within one of his most profitable departments. Victoria, sensing her position deteriorating rapidly, attempted one final desperate defense. These accusations are coming from employees with documented performance issues who are trying to deflect responsibility for their own failures. Sarah, in particular, has been increasingly unreliable due to her family situation. The comment crossed every line of professional decency, and I could no longer maintain my diplomatic approach. My mother died 4 days ago, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion burning inside me. I came to work directly from her funeral because I was told there was a crisis that only I could resolve. I discovered that crisis was manufactured through deliberate suppression of a signed contract and sabotage of work I had previously completed. I turned to Michael directly. I'm not here to attack Victoria personally. I'm here because a $3 million client relationship is at risk due to mismanagement, and because I believe Pinnacle Marketing stands for better values than what has been demonstrated here." The room fell completely silent. Michael studied both sets of documents for several long moments before speaking. "We'll need to adjourn this meeting while I review these materials more thoroughly. Victoria, I'd like you to wait in my office immediately. Sarah, please remain here with the executive team to address any questions about the legitimate Sullivan projections." As Victoria left the room, her face a mask of controlled fury, I felt no triumph, only profound exhaustion and relief that the truth was finally emerging. For the next 3 hours, I answered detailed questions about the Sullivan contract, the timeline of events, and my recommendations for moving forward with the client relationship. The executives were thorough but supportive, clearly concerned about both the immediate client situation and the broader implications of Victoria's conduct. By early afternoon, word came down that Victoria had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a comprehensive investigation. Michael called me into his office, where Linda from HR was waiting with a noticeably different demeanor than her previous dismissive attitude. "First, let me express my personal condolences about your mother," Michael began. "The fact that you're even here today, let alone handling this situation with such professionalism, demonstrates extraordinary character." I nodded my thanks, too emotionally drained for extended conversation. "We've initiated a formal investigation into the issues raised today," he continued. "Based on preliminary findings, including the delayed contract processing and evidence of document manipulation, we've placed Victoria on administrative leave. The investigation will likely take several weeks to complete as we review past incidents that may be connected." Linda slid a document across the desk. "We'd like to offer you 4 weeks of paid bereavement leave, effective immediately. You've more than earned it, and it will give us time to restructure the department and address the systemic issues we've discovered." I stared at the document, torn between relief at the respite and concern about stepping away during such a critical period. "What about the Sullivan contract? They're expecting immediate implementation." Michael smiled slightly. "Actually, I've already spoken with James Sullivan. He was quite concerned to learn about the contract delay, but expressed complete confidence in you. They're willing to adjust the timeline given the circumstances, on the condition that you remain their primary contact as originally requested." It was more than I had dared to hope for. Acknowledgement of the truth, consequences for Victoria's actions, and protection for the client relationship I had worked so hard to build. I signed the bereavement leave document, feeling some of the weight finally lift from my shoulders. As I prepared to leave, gathering personal items from my desk, Jake approached with a knowing smile. "Justice finally served," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you," I told him sincerely. "You risked your own position to support me." He shrugged. "Your mom was right about standing up to bullies. Sometimes it just takes one person with the courage to speak truth first." Rachel was waiting in the lobby, having stayed to provide additional support if needed during the investigation. "Ready to go home?" she asked. As we walked to her car, she said something that surprised me. "Mom would have been incredibly proud today. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you protected other people who had been hurt too." Tears that I had been holding back all day finally spilled over. I just wished she could have seen it. Rachel put her arm around my shoulders. I think maybe she did. 3 weeks later, I returned to a dramatically different workplace. Victoria's investigation had uncovered a pattern of misconduct spanning years, resulting in her termination and the company's decision to settle quietly with several former employees who had been wrongfully terminated. Jake had been promoted to interim department head, and the toxic competitive atmosphere had been replaced with genuine collaboration. The Sullivan Industries contract became one of our most successful partnerships, leading to additional opportunities and industry recognition for innovative strategy. More importantly, the culture shift in our department attracted talented professionals who had previously avoided Pinnacle due to its reputation under Victoria's leadership. 6 months after that terrible night in my funeral dress, I was promoted to senior account director with a substantial salary increase and leadership responsibilities I had never imagined possible. But the greatest satisfaction came from knowing that Mom's lessons about integrity and standing up to bullies had ultimately guided me to not just survive, but thrive. During my acceptance speech at the company's annual awards ceremony, where I received recognition for the Sullivan campaign, I mentioned my mother's influence on my professional values. She taught me that how we treat others in their darkest moments reveals our true character, I said, looking out at my colleagues and thinking about Victoria's cruelty contrasted with Rachel's unexpected support. Later that evening, as I celebrated with my family at Mom's favorite restaurant, Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To Catherine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become, Sarah. You honored her memory by refusing to let someone else's darkness dim your light." I thought about that night often in the months that followed, how close I had come to breaking under Victoria's campaign of psychological warfare, and how Mom's wisdom had ultimately provided the strength I needed to fight back with integrity rather than bitterness. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us accidentally give us exactly what we need to not just survive, but discover strength we never knew we possessed. Victoria's cruelty, intended to break me during my most vulnerable moment, instead revealed a resilience I inherited from my mother and the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying. The best revenge, as it turned out, wasn't getting even with Victoria. It was building the career and life that Mom had always believed I was capable of achieving, surrounded by people who lifted each other up instead of tearing each other down. That's a lesson I carry with me every day, and one I hope resonates with anyone facing their own workplace bully or personal crisis. Sometimes our darkest moments become the foundation for our greatest triumphs, especially when we remember that our dignity is something only we can choose to surrender. Mom was right. Kindness is strength, but that doesn't mean we have to accept abuse. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and others is to stand up and fight back with courage, integrity, and the unshakable belief that we deserve better. Victoria never returned to the marketing industry. Last I heard, she was working in a completely different field, hopefully having learned that success built on others' suffering is ultimately unsustainable. As for me, I continue to honor Mom's memory by treating others with the respect and kindness she taught me, while never again allowing anyone to mistake that kindness for weakness. The black dress I wore to Mom's funeral and then to that fateful night at the office now hangs in my closet as a reminder, not of grief, but of resilience. Sometimes I look at it and remember that night when everything changed, when I stopped being a victim of someone else's cruelty and started being the author of my own story. That's the legacy Mom left me, not just the memory of her love, but the strength to love myself enough to demand better. And that, I've learned, makes all the difference. #My boss forced me to work 20 hours after my mother's funeral, but she forgot about the $3 million deal.